Hello. How is everyone tonight? Oh, hold on. Hold on. I actually need to do something. Oh, I just realized I can just plug my headphones in. Someone's in room 302? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And don't worry about how much time I spent cobbling this together. It was way too long, is your answer. Way too fucking long. I also, you'd be surprised that this isn't a screenshot from Silent Hill 4. So, I would like to actually ask a question. Can anyone hear the nature sounds outdoors? Are those picking up on mic? Have you tried calling the billboard outside? Yes. Oh, thank God. Are they too much? Are they too much at all? Or are they relatively calming? No? Okay. I'm just double checking. Don't mind me looking around erratically. My setup's a little weird. Adds to the ambiance. Okay, I just wanted to be sure. Although I'ma do one thing right quick. One thing. I'm gonna close my window a little bit, so not a lot of sound comes through, but just enough does. Hold on. I don't expect it to rain too terribly much, but I don't want that to overpower me in case it does. So how's everyone doing tonight? How's everyone holding up? I've got a small plan. I don't know how long the stream is going to take. I have a goal to go through 5 stories. All by H.P. Lovecraft. Don't worry, I double-checked specific words, let's say, to be sure that they would be Twitch/YouTube friendly. Just in case. I don't think this website documented those. Yes, the funny cat man, but I did not want reference to his funny cat, let's say. Just in case, you know? I also wouldn't have read it on air anyways. But I control-F'd all these stories to make sure at least there were no slurs. Yeah, those I am trying to avoid. Before we start, I would like to thank Mr. Asada for the follow. Thanks a lot. It's much appreciated. So, a bit of ground rules, because I've never done this before, but I do want a specific ambiance. Okay, I am not going to do any of the voice redeems. I am going to try to stick to this tone. I'm definitely not going to do a break in the story for specific, hey, have me say this. But certain things such as a posture check, drink the water, things like that, absolutely still allowed. I just don't want to be changing voices midstream, mid-story. Just for the sake of ease of listening in future and during the stream. But either way, I've lined up 5 stories tonight. You'll save those points? Exactly. I want y'all to save your points. I want y'all to be... I don't want y'all to waste points over something I'm not going to do as ground rules. Yeah, I don't want to break the mood, essentially. Even if Lovecraft's language is quite flowery. It's, yeah. Just making this the best thing I possibly can. Without further ado, let us start with from beyond. Horrible beyond conception was the change which had taken place in my best friend, Crawford Tillinghast. I had not seen him since that day, 2 months and a half before, when he told me toward what goal his physical and metaphysical researches were leading, when he had answered my odd and most frightened remonstrances by driving me from his laboratory and his house in a burst of fanatical rage. I had known that he had remained mostly shut in the attic laboratory with that accursed electrical machine, eating little and excluding even the servants, but I had not thought that a brief period of 10 weeks could so alter and disfigure any human creature. It is not pleasant to see a stout man grow suddenly thin, and it is even worse when the baggy skin becomes yellowed or grayed, the eyes sunken, circled and uncannily glowing, the forehead veined and corrugated, and the hands tremulous and twitching. And if added to this, there be a repellent unkemptness, a wild disorder of dress, a bushiness of dark hair, white at the roots, and an unchecked growth of light beard on a face once clean-shaven. The cumulative effect is quite shocking. But such was the aspect of Crawford Tillinghast on the night of his half-coherent message brought me to his door after my weeks of exile. Such was the spectre that trembled as it admitted me, candle in hand, and glanced furtively over its shoulder as if fearful of unseen things in the ancient, lonely house set back from Benevolent Street. The Crawford Tillinghast should ever have studied science and philosophy was a mistake. These things should be left to the frigid and impersonal investigator, for they offer two equally tragic alternatives to the man of feeling and action: despair. If he fail in his quest, and terrors unutterable and unimaginable if he succeed, Tillinghast had once been the prey of failure, solitary and melancholy. But now I knew, with nauseating fears of my own, that he was the prey of success. I had indeed warned him 10 weeks before, when he burst forth with his tale of what he kept himself about to discover. He had been flushed and excited then, talking in high and unnatural, though always pedantic voice. "What do we know," he said, "of the world and the universe about us? Our means of receiving impressions are absurdly few, and our notions of surrounding objects infinitely narrow. We see things only as we are constructed to see them, and can gain no idea of their absolute nature. With 5 feeble senses, we pretended to comprehend the boundlessly complex cosmos, and yet other beings with wider, stronger, or different range of senses might not only see very differently the things we see, but might see and study whole worlds of matter, energy, and life which lie close at hand yet can never be detected with the senses we have. I have always believed that such strange, inaccessible worlds exist at our very elbows, and now I believe I have found a way to break down the barriers. I'm not joking. Within 24 hours, that machine near the table will generate waves acting on unrecognized sense organs that exist in us as atrophied and rudimentary vestiges. Those waves will open up to us as many vistas unknown to man and several unknown to anything we consider organic life. We shall see that which dogs howl in the dark, and things which cats prick up their ears after midnight. We shall see these things and other things which no breathing creature had yet seen. We shall overleap time, space, and dimensions, and without bodily motion peer at the bottom of creation. When Tillinghast said those words, I remonstrated, for I knew him well enough to be frightened rather than amused. He was a fanatic, and drove me from his house. Now he was no less a fanatic, but his desire to speak had conquered his resentment, and he had written me imperatively in a hand I could scarcely recognize. As I entered the abode of the friend so suddenly metamorphosed into a shriveling gargoyle, I become infected with the terror which seeks which seems stalking in all the shadows. The words and beliefs expressed 10 weeks before seem bodied forth in the darkness beyond the same circle of candlelight. And I am sickened at the hollow, altered voice of my host. I wish those servants were about, and did not like it. I wish the servants were about, and did not like it when he said that they all left 3 days previously. It seemed strange that old Gregory, at least, should desert his master without telling as tried a friend as I. It was he who had given me the information I had of Tillinghast after I was repulsed in rage. Yet I soon subordinated all my fears to my growing curiosity and fascination. Just what Crawford Tillinghast now wished of me I could only guess, but that he had some stupendous secret or discovery to impart, I could not doubt. Before I had protested at his unnatural pryings into the unthinkable. Now he had evidently succeeded to some degree. I almost shared his spirit, terrible though the cost of victory appeared. Up through the dark emptiness of the house I followed, the bobbing candle in the hand of this shaking parody of a man. The electricity seemed to be turned off, and when I asked my guide, he said it was for a definite reason. It would be too much. I would not dare, he continued to mutter. I especially noted his new habit of muttering, for it was not like him to talk to himself. We entered the laboratory into his attic, and I observed that detestable electrical machine, glowing with a sickly, sinister violet luminosity. It was connected with a powerful chemical battery, but seemed to be receiving no current, for I recalled that in its experimental stage, it had sputtered and purred when in action. In reply to my question, Tillinghast mumbled that his permanent glow was not electrical in any sense that I could understand. He now seated me near the machine, so that it was to my right, and turned a switch somewhere below the crowning cluster of grass bulbs. The usual sputtering began, turned to a whine, and terminated in a drone as soft as to suggest a return to silence. Meanwhile, the luminosity increased, waned waned again, then assumed a pale auteur color, or blend of colors which I could neither place nor describe. Tillinghast had been approaching me. Tillinghast had been watching me and noted my puzzled expression. "Do you know what this is?" he whispered. "This is ultraviolet." He chuckled oddly at my surprise. "You thought ultraviolet was invisible, and so it is, but you can see that and many other invisible things now. Listen to me. The waves from that thing are waking 1,000 sleeping senses in us, senses which we inherit from aeons of evolution from the state of detached electrons to the state of organic humanity. I have seen the truth, and I intend to show it to you. Do you wonder how it will seem? I will tell you. Here, Tillinghast seated himself directly opposite me, blowing out his candle and staring hideously into my eyes. Your existing sense organs, ears first, I think, will pick up many of the impressions, for they are closely connected with the dormant organs. Then there will be others. You have heard of the pineal gland. I laughed at the shallow endocrinologist, fellow dupe, and fellow parvenu of the Freudian. The gland is the great sense organ of organs, I have found out. It is like sight in the end and transmits visual pictures to the brain. If you are normal, that is the way you ought to get most of it. Get most of the evidence from the beyond. I looked into the immense attic room with the sloping south wall, dimly lit by rays which the everyday eye cannot see. The far corners were all shadows, and the whole place took on a hazy unreality which obscured its nature, and invited the imagination to symbolism and phantasm. During the interval that Tillinghast was long silent, I fancied myself in some vast, incredible temple of long-dead gods, some vague edifice of innumerable black stone columns, reaching from a floor of damp slabs to a cloudy height beyond the range of my vision. The picture was very vivid for a while, but gradually gave way to a more horrible conception, that of utter, absolute solitude and infinite, sightless, soundless space. There seemed to be a void and nothing more, and I felt a childish fear which prompted me to draw from my hip pocket the revolver I carried since the dark night I was held up in East Providence. From then the farthermost regions of remoteness, the sound softly glided into existence. It was infinitely faint, subtly vibrant, and unmistakably musical, but held a quality of surpassing wildness which made its impact feel like a delicate torture to my whole body. I felt sensations like those one feels when accidentally scratching ground glass. Simultaneously, there developed something like a cold drought, which apparently swept past me from the direction of the distant sound. As I waited breathlessly, I perceived that both sound and wind were increasing, the effect being to give me an odd notion of myself as tied to a pair of rails in the path of a gigantic approaching locomotive. I began to speak to Tillinghast, and as I did, all the unusual impressions abruptly vanished. I only saw the man, the glowing machines, and the dim apartment. Tillinghast was grinning repulsively at the revolver which I had almost unconsciously drawn, but from his expression, I was sure he had almost heard and seen as much as I, if not a great deal more. I whispered what I had experienced, and then he bade me to remain as quiet and receptive as possible. Yes, thank you. Don't move, he cautioned, for in these rays we are able to be seen as well as to see. I told you the servants left, but I didn't tell you how. It was that thick-witted housekeeper. She turned on the lights downstairs after I warned her not to, and the wires picked up sympathetic vibrations. It must have been frightful. I could hear the screams up here in spite of all I was seeing and hearing from another direction, and later it was rather awful to find those empty heaps of clothes around the house. Ms. Updike's clothes were close to the front hall switch. That's how I know she did it. It got them all. But so long as we didn't move, we were fairly safe. Remember, we're still dealing with a hideous world in which we are practically helpless. Keep still. The combined shock of the revelation and the abrupt command gave me a kind of paralysis, and in my terror my mind once again opened to the impressions coming from what Tillinghast called beyond. I was now in a vortex of sound and motion, which confused pictures before my eyes. I saw the blurred outlines of a room, but from some point in space there seemed to be pouring a seething column of unrecognizable shapes or clouds, penetrating the solid roof at a point ahead and to the right of me. When I glimpsed the temple-like effect again, but this time the pillars reached up into an aerial ocean of light, which sent down one blinding beam along the path of the cloudy column I had kept before. After that scene was almost wholly kaleidoscopic, and in the jumble of signs, sounds, and unidentified sense impressions, I felt that I was about to dissolve, or in some ways lose, solid form. One definite flash I shall always remember. I seemed for an instant to behold a patch of strange night sky filled with shining, revolving spheres. As if receded, I saw that the glowing suns formed a constellation or galaxy of unsettled shape. This shaping the distorted face of Crawford Tillinghast. At another time, I felt the huge, animate things brushing past me and occasionally walking or drifting through my supposedly stolid body. And though I saw Tillinghast look at them as though his better trained senses could catch them visually, I recalled what he had said of the pineal gland, and wondered what he now saw with his preternatural eye. 2 seconds, I need to. Suddenly I became possessed with some kind of augmented sight. Over and above the luminous and shadowy chaos arose a picture which, though vague, held elements of consistency and permanence. I was indeed somewhat familiar for the unusual part was superimposed upon the usual terrestrial scene, much as a cinema view may be thrown upon the painted curtain of a theater. I saw the attic library, the electrical machine, and the unsightly form of Tillinghast opposite me. But all the space unoccupied by familiar objects, not one particle was vacant. Indescribable shapes, both alive and otherwise, were mixed in disgusting disarray, and close to every known thing were whole words of alien, unknown entities. It likewise seemed that all the unknown things entered into the composition of other unknown things, and vice versa. Foremost among the living objects were inky, jellyfish monstrosities which feebly quivered in harmony with the vibrations from the machine. They were present in loathsome profusion, and I saw to my horror that they overlapped. That they were semi-fluid and capable of passing through one another, and through what we know as solids. These things were never still, but seemed ever floating about with some malignant purpose. Sometimes they appeared to devour one another, the attacker launching itself at the victim, instantaneously obliterating the latter from sight. Shudderingly, I felt what I knew I had obliterated the unfortunate. Shudderingly, I felt I knew what had obliterated the unfortunate servants, and could not exclude the thing from my mind as I strove to observe other properties of the newly visible world that lies unseen around us. But Tillinghast had been watching me, and was speaking. You see them? You see them? You see the things that float and flop about you, and through your very movement, and through you every moment of your life? You see the creatures that form what men call pure air and the blue sky? Have I not succeeded in breaking down the barrier? Have I not shown you worlds and that no other living men have seen? I heard him scream through the horrible chaos, and looked at the wild face thrust so offensively close to mine. His eyes were pits of flame. They glared at me. What I now saw was overwhelming hatred. The machine droned detestably. You think those floundering things wiped out the servants? Fool, they were harmless. But the servants are gone, aren't they? You tried to stop me. You discouraged me when I needed every drop of encouragement I could get. You were afraid of the cosmic truth, you damned coward. And now I've got you. What swept up the servants? What made them scream so loud? Don't know, eh? You'll know soon enough. Look at me. Listen to what I say. Do you suppose there are really any such things as time and magnitude? Do you fancy there are such things as form and matter? I tell you, I have struck the depths that your little brain can't picture. I have seen beyond the bounds of infinity and drawn down demons from the stars. I have harnessed the shadows that stride from world to world to sow death and madness. Space belongs to me. Do you hear? Things are hunting me now. The things that devour and dissolve. But I know how to elude them. It is you that they will get, as they got the servants. Stirring, dear sir? I told you it was dangerous to move. I have saved you so far by telling you to keep still. Saved you to see more sights and to listen to me. If you had moved, they wouldn't have been... If you had moved, they wouldn't have been at you long ago. Don't worry. They won't hurt you. They didn't hurt the servants. It was the seeing that made the poor devils scream so. My pets are not pretty, for they come from places where aesthetic standards are very different. Disintegration is quite painless, I assure you, but I want you to see them. I almost saw them, but I knew how to stop. You are curious. I always knew you were no scientist. Trembling with anxiety to see the ultimate things I've discovered. Why don't you move, then? Tired? Well, don't worry, my friend, for they are coming. Look, curse you, look. It's just over your left shoulder. What remains to be told is very brief, and may be familiar to the... What remains to be told is very brief and may be familiar to you from the newspaper accounts. The police heard a shot in the old Tillinghast house and found us there. Tillinghast dead and me unconscious. They arrested me because my revolver was in my hand, but released me in 3 hours after they found it was apoplectic. Hold on. Apoplexy. Okay. They arrested me because the revolver was in my hand, but released me in 3 hours after they found it was apoplexy, which had finished Tillinghast, and saw that my shot had been directed at the noxious machine, which now lay hopelessly shattered on the laboratory floor. I did not tell very much of what I had seen, for I feared the coroner would be skeptical. From the evasive outline I did give, the doctor told me I had undoubtedly been hypnotized by the vindictive and homicidal madman. I wish I could believe that doctor. It would help my shaky nerves if I could dismiss what I now have to think of the air and the sky and those above me. I never feel alone or comfortable, and a hideous sense of pursuit sometimes comes chillingly on me when I am weary. What prevents me from believing the doctor's one simple fact, that the police never found the bodies of those servants whom they say Crawford Tillinghast murdered. And that is From Beyond. There was a comment from Mutated May that I actually full-heartedly agree with. I love the movie based on this. It's also one of my favorites from just Lovecraft's bibliography. I was trying to find the right word for it. How was that? Did you guys enjoy that? Let me just... What movie? From Beyond. It's great. It's amazing. And it's very short. It's good? Good. I'm aware that I paused every once in a while to either catch my breath or make sure my brain wasn't going faster than my mouth, or vice versa. It's free on Pluto, and you think Tubi? Reminds you of old school creepypasta reading. That's what I'm trying to go for. Small flaw is that I can't just take my best takes of every paragraph. I have to just do it in one go and correct when I'm super wrong. I'm gonna pop my head in. Whoop. Live, everybody. Yeah. In the words of gentleman scholar Bill O'Reilly, fuck it. We'll do it live. Well, I shouldn't even joke about him being a gentleman scholar. He's a kook. I don't know how else to put that nicely. Either way, next, a real pizza, a real donut. Isn't O'Reilly, is he? I think you're right, but no, he's still alive. He's 71? Huh. Had 2 kids. Unfortunate. Indeed. How the fuck is he alive though? Money. That's your answer, more than likely. Your reading has made you feel very sleepy and you were going to sleep. Thank you. That's the goal. It's a bedtime story stream, essentially. Either way, enough current events and worrying about horrible people from right now. Let's read a story from a questionable man from back in the day. In a good way, you mean, oh yeah, again, that's the intent. Next, we have Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the ardent void. I do not recall distinctly where it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. to a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger, a danger widespread and all-embracing. Such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces, and whispering warnings and prophecies which no one dared to consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses, between the stars, swept chill currents that made men shiver in the dark and lonely places. There was a demonic alteration in the sequence of the seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were unknown. And it was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, none could tell, but he was of the old native blood and spoke like a pharaoh. The Fellahin knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on the planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal, combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep, and shuddered. And where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished. For the small hours were rent in the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters gliding under bridges, and old steeples crumbling against a sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him, and of the compelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost atrocities. My friend said they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, that what was known on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy. And in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before, yet which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep took on sights which others saw not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night that the restless crowds to see... It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowds to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and the endless stairs into the choking room, and shadowed on a screen I saw hooded forms amidst ruins, the yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments. And I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. And when the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood up on end while shadows more grotesque than I can tell came out and squatted on the heads, and when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drove us all out, down the dizzy stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I could never be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swear to one another that the city was exactly the same and still alive, and when the magnetic lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again, and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for where we began to depend on its light, we drifted into curious involuntary formations, and seemed to know our destinations, though we dared not think of them. And once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose and displayed by grass, which with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways and run. And again we saw a tramcar, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. When we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with a laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked towards the open country, and presently felt a chill which had not been of the hot autumn, for as we stalked out the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows, trackless, inexplicable snows, swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I heard the reverberations of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight. As if beckoned by those who had gone before, I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid, into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in the hands that are not hands, and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brushed the pallid stars and made them flicker low. Beyond the world's vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on the nameless rocks beneath the space and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And though this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time, the detestable pounding and piping whereunto dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, tenebrous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles, whose soul is Nyarlathotep. Oh, I'm actually really proud of that one. I only fucked up like twice, maybe 3 times. That's a new record. Yeah, that... Huh. It's actually super rare that I'm really happy with a reading. Especially on the first go. For a bit of background, when I was much younger, I did consider doing creepypasta readings. It's not something I really went to pursue, and I never really published anything because at the end of the day I went, I'll just do voice work. And that was the easier way to do it. I kind of regret not doing creepypastas at the time I was considering it because they were getting a surge in popularity somewhat soon. But that's not bad. That's not bad at all. Okay. So, I do want to ask, I have one that I'm saving for last, because personal reasons of me liking it. But I want to ask the people that are here. Do you want the shorter story or the longer story next? Because let me get this straight. The last story is a bit long. It's not as long as the one I have on my tab right now, but it's one of his longer, still short ones. I just want one little bit of input, just in case. I want to know. I want to know. God, it is really nice out. Like, sonically. Just, like, beautiful noises out there. I really like the pitter-pattering of, like, it's not raining anymore, but you can still... Yeah, I think it's being picked up. I think you can still hear, like, from my gutter or, like, some other surface that has a lip to it. You can hear just a little bit of rain. Tap, 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 tap. It's a nice night here, too. Good, good. May, do you want the longer or shorter one? Because I'm not sure which one to do next. I kind of line them up arbitrarily. Long? Okay. So we'll do long, short, long. That's fine. Here we have Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft. You needn't think I'm crazy, Elliot. Plenty of others have queerer prejudices than this. Why don't you laugh at Oliver's grandfather, who won't ride in a motor? If I don't like that damned subway, it's my own business, and we got here more quickly anyhow in the taxi. We'd have had to walk up the hill from Park Street if we had taken the car. I know I'm more nervous than I was when you saw me last year, but you don't need to hold a clinic over it. There's plenty of reason. God knows, and I fancy I'm lucky to be sane at all. Why the third degree? You don't need to be so inquisitive. Well, if you must hear it, I don't know why you shouldn't. Maybe you ought to, anyhow, for you kept writing me like a grieved parent when you heard I'd begun to cut the art club and keep away from Pickman. LA's disappeared. I go round to the club every once in a while, but my nerves aren't what they were. No, I don't know what became of Pickman, and I don't like to guess. You might have surmised I have some insider information when I dropped him, and that's why I don't want to think where he's gone. Let the police find what they can. Won't be much, judging from the fact that they don't know yet of the old North End place he hired under the name of Peters. I'm not sure that I could find it again myself. Not that I'd ever try, even in broad daylight. Yes, I do know, or am afraid I know, why he maintained it. I'm coming to that, and I think you'll understand before I'm through why I don't tell the police. They would ask me to guide them, but I couldn't go back there even if I knew the way. There was something there. And I now can't use the subway and you may as well have your laugh at this too, go down in the cellars anymore. I should think you'd have known I didn't drop Pickman for the same silly reasons that fussy old women like Dr. Reed or Joe Minot or Rossworth did. Morbid art doesn't shock me. When a man has the genius Pickman had, I feel it an honor to know him. No matter what direction his work takes, Boston never had a greater painter than Richard Upton Pickman. I said it the first day, and I say it still, and I never swerved an inch when he showed that ghoul feeding. That, you remember, was when Minot cut him. You know, it takes a profound art and profound insight into nature to turn into stuff like Pickman's. Any magazine cover can hack splash paint around wildly and call it a nightmare or a witch's sabbath or a portrait of the devil. But only a great painter can make such a thing really scare or ring true. That's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of That's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible, or the psyche, or the physiology of fear, the exact sort of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper color contrasts and lighting effects to stir the dormant sense of strangeness. I don't have to tell you why a Fuseli really brings out a shiver, while a cheap ghost story, a frontispiece, merely makes us laugh. There's something that follows catch, beyond life, that they're able to make us catch for a second. Dora had it. Seam had it. Angarala of Chicago had it. And Pickman had it as no man has ever had it before, or, I hope to heaven, ever again. Don't ask me what it is they see. In ordinary art, where all the difference in the world between the vital, breathing things drawn from my nature or models of the artificial truck, the commercial, small fry reel of in ordinary art, there's all the difference in the world between a vital, breathing thing drawn from nature or models and the artificial truck that commercial small fry reel off in a bare studio by rule. Well, I should say that the really weird artist has a kind of vision that makes models, or summons up what amounts to actual scenes from the spectral world he lives in. Anyhow, he manages to turn out results that differ from the pretender's mince pie dreams in just about the same way that the life painter's results differ from the concoctions of a correspondence school cartoonist. If I had ever seen what Pickman saw, but no. Here, let's have a drink before we go any deeper. God, I wouldn't be alive if I'd ever seen what that man, if he was a man, saw. You recall that Pickman's forte was faces. I don't believe anybody since Goya could put so much sheer hell into a set of features or a twist of expression. And before Goya, you have to go back to the medieval chaps who did the gargoyles and chimeras of Notre Dame and Mont Saint-Michel. They believed all sorts of things, and maybe they saw all sorts of things too. For the Middle Ages had some curious phases. I remember you're asking Pickman yourself once, the year before you went away, wherever in thunder he got such ideas and visions. Wasn't that a nasty laugh he gave you? It was partly because of that laugh that Reed dropped him. Reed, had taken up comparative pathology, was full of pompous inside stuff about the biological or evolutionary significance of this or that mental or physical symptom. He said Pickman repelled him more and more every day, and almost frightened him towards the last. But the fellow's features and expression were slowly developing in a way he didn't like, in a way that wasn't human. He had a lot of talk about diet, and said Pickman must be abnormal and eccentric to the last degree. I suppose you told Reed, if you and he had any correspondence over it, that he'd let Pickman's paintings get on his nerve or harrow up his imagination. I know I told him that myself then. But keep in mind that I didn't drop Pickman for anything like this. On the contrary, my admiration for him kept growing, for that ghoul feeding was a tremendous achievement. As you know, the club wouldn't exhibit it, and the Museum of Fine Arts wouldn't accept it as a gift. And I can add that nobody would buy it. So Pickman had it right in his house till he went. Now, his father had it in Salem. You know Pickman comes of old Salem stock, and had a witch ancestor hanged in 1692. I got into the habit of calling on Pickman quite often, especially after I began making notes for a monograph on weird art. Probably it was his work which put the idea in my head, anyhow, I found him a mine of data and suggestions that I came to develop it. He showed me all the paintings and drawings he had about it, including some pen and ink sketches that I verily believe, have got him kicked out of the club if many of the members had seen them. Before long, I was pretty nearly a devotee. I would listen for hours like a schoolboy to art theories and philosophic speculations, wild enough to quantify him for the Danvers Asylum. My hero worship, coupled with the fact that people generally were commencing to have less and less to do with him, made him get very confidential with me. And one evening he hinted that if I were fairly close-mouthed and none too squeamish, he might show me something rather unusual, something a bit stronger than anything he had in his house. You know, he said, there are things that won't do for Newbury Street, things that are out of place here, and that can't be conceived here. Anyhow, it's my business to catch the overtones of the soul, and you can't find those in a parvenu, a set of artificial streets on made land. Back Bay isn't Boston. It isn't anything yet, because it's not had time to pick up memories and attract local spirits. If there are any ghosts here, they're the tame ghosts of a salt marsh and a sallow cove, and I want human ghosts. The ghosts of beings highly organized enough to have looked on hell and known the meanings of what they saw. This is a place for an artist. I'm sorry. The place for an artist to live is the North End. If any aesthete were sincere, he'd put up at the slums for the sake of mass traditions. God, man, don't you realize that places like that weren't merely made, but actually grew? Generalization after generalization lived and felt and died there, and in days when people weren't afraid to live and feed and die. Don't you know there was a mill on Copp's Hill in 1632, and half the present streets were laid out by 1650? I can show you the houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half more. Houses that have witnessed what would make a modern house crumble into powder. What do moderns know of life and the forces behind it? You call the Salem witchcraft a delusion, but I'll wager my 4 times great-grandmother could have told you things. They hanged her on Gallows Hill, with Cotton Mather looking sanctimoniously on. Mather, damn him, was afraid that nobody might succeed in kicking free of his accursed cage of monotony. I wish someone had laid a spell on him or sucked his blood in the night. I can show you a house he lived in. I can show you another one he was afraid to enter in spite of all his fine, bold talk. He knew things he didn't dare would put that stupid Magnalia, or that puerile wonders of the invisible world. Look here. Do you know the whole North End once had a set of tunnels that kept certain people in touch with others' houses, and the buying ground, and the sea? Let them prosecute and persecute above ground. Things went on every day that they couldn't reach, and voices laughed at night that they couldn't place. Why, man, out of 10,000... Why, man, out of 10 surviving houses built before 1700, and not moved since I'll wager that in 8, I can show you something queer in the cellar. There's hardly a month that you can't read of workmen finding bricked-up arches and wells leading nowhere in this or that old place as it comes down. You could see one near Henchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches, and what their spells summoned, pirates, and what they brought in from sea, smugglers, privateers, and I tell you, people knew how to live, and how to enlarge the bounds of life in the old time. This isn't the only world a bold and wise man could know. Pho! And to think of today in contrast, with such pale pink brains that even a club of supposed artists get shudders and convulsion if a picture goes beyond the feelings of a Beacon Street tea table. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to give questions. The past... Apologies. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to question the past very closely. What do maps and records and guidebooks really tell of the North End? Bah! At a guess, I'll guarantee to lead you to 30 or 40 alleys in the networks of alleys north of Prince Street that weren't suspected by 10 living beings outside of foreigners that swarmed them. And what do these Dagos know of their meaning? No, Thurber. These ancient places were dreaming gorgeously and overflowing with wonder and terror and escapes from the commonplace. And yet there is not a living soul to understand or profit by them. Or rather, there's only one living soul, for I haven't been digging around in the past for nothing. See here, you're interested in this sort of thing. What if I told you that I've got another studio up there, where I can catch the night spirit of antique horror and paint things I couldn't think of in Newbury Street? Naturally, I wouldn't tell those cursed old maids at the club, with Reed, damn him, whispering, even as it is, that I'm the sort of monster bound to the toboggan of reverse evolution. Yes, Thurber, I decided long ago that one must paint terror as well as beauty from life, and so I did some exploring in places where I had reason to know terror lives. I've got a place that I don't believe 3 living Nordic men besides myself have ever seen. It isn't so very far from the elevated as the distance goes, but it's centuries away as the soul goes. I took it because of the queer old brick well in the cellar. One of the sort I told you about. The shack's almost tumbling down so that nobody else would live there. I'd hate to tell you how little I pay for it. The windows are boarded up, but I think that's all the better, since I don't want daylight for what I do. I paint in the cellar, where the inspiration is thickest, and I've other rooms furnished from the ground floor. A Sicilian owns it, and I've hired it under the name of Peters. Now, if you're game, I'll take you there tonight. I think you'll enjoy the pictures, for, as I said, I've let myself go a bit there. It's no fast tour. I sometimes do it on foot, for I don't want to attract attention with a taxi in such a place. We can take the shuttle at the South Station for Battery Street, and after that, the walk isn't much. Well, Elliot, there wasn't much for me to do after that harangue, but to keep myself from running instead of walking, for the first vacant cab we could sight. We changed to the elevated at the South Station, and at about 12 o'clock had climbed the streets to Battery Street, and struck along the old waterfront past Constitution Wharf. I didn't keep track of the cross streets, and couldn't tell you which it was we had turned up, but I know it wasn't Greenough Drive. Sorry. But I know it wasn't Greenough Lane. When we did turn in, it was to climb through the deserted length of the oldest and dirtiest alley I've ever saw in my life, with crumbling-looking gables, broken, small-paned windows, and archaic chimneys that stood over half disintegrated across the moonlit sky. I can't believe there were 3 houses in sight that hadn't been standing in Cotton Mather's time. Certainly I glimpsed at least 2 with an overhang, and once I thought I saw a peaked roof line from the almost forgotten pre-Gambrel type, though antiquarians tell us there were none left in Boston. From that alley, which had a dim light, we turned to the left in an equally silent and still narrower alley with no light at all, and in a minute made what I think was an obtuse angled bend towards the right in the dark. Not long after this, Pickman produced a flashlight and revealed the antediluvian 10-paneled door that looked damnably worm-eaten. Unlocking it, he ushered me into a barren hallway, which was once splendid dark oak paneling, simple, of course, but thrillingly suggestive of the times of Andros and Phillips and the witchcraft. When he took me through the door on the left, lighted an oil lamp, and told me to make myself at home. Now, Elliot, I'm what the man in the street would call a fairly hard-boiled one. But I confess that what I saw on the walls of that room gave me a bad turn. They were his pictures, you know, the ones he couldn't paint or even show in Newbury Street. And he was right when he said he had let himself go. Here, have another drink. I need one anyhow. There's no use in trying to tell you what they were like, because the awful, the blasphemous horror, and the unbelievable loathsomeness and moral fortor came from simple touches quite beyond the power of words to classify. There was none of the exotic technique you see in Sydney Syme, none of the trans-Saturnian landscapes and lunar fungi of Clark Ashton Smith uses to freeze the blood. The backgrounds were mostly old churchyards, deep woods, cliffs by the sea, brick tunnels, ancient paneled rooms, or simple vaults of masonry. Copp's Hill Burying Ground, which could not be many blocks away from this very house, was a favorable scene. The madness and monstrosity lay in the figures in the foreground, for Pickman's morbid art was preeminently one of demonic portraiture. These figures were seldom completely human, and often approached humanity in varying degree. Most of the bodies were roughly bipedal, and had a forward slumping and a vaguely canine cast. The texture of the majority was a kind slumping and a vague canine cast. The texture of the majority was a kind of unpleasant rubberiness. I can see them now. Their occupations, well, don't ask me to be too precise. They were usually feeding. I don't say on what. They were sometimes shown in groups in cemeteries or underground passages, often appeared to be in battle over their prey, or rather their treasure trove. And what damnable expressiveness Pickman sometimes gave the slightest faces of his charnel booty. According to the things were shown through, leaping through the windows at night, or squatting on the chests of sleepers, worrying at their throats. One canvas showed a ring from them baying about 100 witch on Gallows Hill, whose dead face held a close kinship to theirs. But don't get the idea that it was all this hideous business of theme and setting which struck me faint. I am not a 3-year-old kid, and I've seen much like this before. It was the faces, Elliot, those accursed faces that leered and slavered out of the canvas with the very breath of life. By God, man, I verily believe that they were alive. The nauseous wizard had waked the fires of hell in pigment, and his brush had been a nightmare-spawning wand. Give me that decanter, Elliot. There was one thing called the lesson, heaven pity me, that I ever saw it. Listen, you can fancy a squatting circle of nameless dog-like things in a churchyard teaching a small child how to feed like themselves? The prince of a changeling, I suppose. You know the old myth about how the weird people leave their spawn in cradles in exchange for the human babes they steal? Pickman was showing what happens to those stolen babies, how they grow up, and when I began to see a hideous relationship in the faces of the human and non-human figures. He was, in all his gradations of morbidity between the frankly non-human and degradedly human, establishing a sardonic linkage in evolution. The dog things were developed from mortals. And no sooner had I wondered what he made from their young, as left with mankind in the form of changelings, than my eye caught a picture embodying the very thought. It was that of a Puritan interior, a heavily beamed room with lattice windows, a settle, and clumsy 17th century furniture, with the family sitting about while the father read from the scriptures. Every face but one showed nobility and reverence, but one reflected the mockery of the pit. It was that of a young man in years, and no doubt belonged to a supposed son of that pious father, but in essence it was the kin of the unclean things. It was that changeling, and in a spirit of supreme irony, Pickman had given the features a very perceptible resemblance of his own. By this time, Pickman had lighted a lamp in an adjoining room and was politely holding the door open for me, asking if I would care to see his modern studies. I haven't been able to give him so much of my opinions. I was too speechless with fright and loathing. but I think he was fully understood and felt highly complimented. And now I want to assure you again, Elliot, I am no mollycoddle to scream at anything that shows a bit of departure from the usual. I'm a middle-aged and decently sophisticated, and I guess you saw enough of me in France to know that I'm not easily knocked out. Remember, too, that I just about recovered my wind and gotten used to the frightful pictures which turned colonial New England into a kind of annex of hell. Well, in spite of this, that next room forced a real scream out of me. I had to clutch the doorway to keep from keeling over. The chamber had shown a pack of ghouls and witches overrunning the world of our forefathers. But this one brought the horror right into our daily life. God, how that man could paint. There was a study called Subway Accident, in which a flock of vile things were clambering from upon some unknown catacomb through a crack in the floor of the Boston Street subway and attacking a crowd of people on the platform. Another showed a dance on Copp's Hill among the tombs with the background of today. Then there were many numbers of cellar views, with monsters creeping in through holes and rifts in the masonry and grinning as they squatted behind barrels or furnaces and waited for their first victim to descend the stairs. One disgusting canvas seemed to depict a vast cross-section of Beacon Hill, with ant-like armies of mephitic monsters squeezing themselves through burrows that honeycomb the ground. Dances in the modern cemeteries were freely pictured, and another conception somehow shocked me more than the rest. A scene in an unknown vault, where scores of beasts crowded about one who had a well-known Boston guidebook. I was evidently reading aloud. All were pointing to a certain passage, and every face seemed so distorted with epileptic and reverberant laughter that I was almost thought I heard the fiendish echoes. The title of the picture was Holmes, Lowell, and Longfellow Lie Buried in Mount Auburn. As I gradually steadied myself and got readjusted to the second room of devilry and morbidity, I began to analyze some of the points in my sickening loathing. In the first place, I said to myself, these things repelled because of the utter inhumanity and callous crudity that had shown in Pickman. The fellow must be a relentless enemy of all mankind to take such glee in the torture of brain and flesh and the degradation of the mortal tenement. In the second place, they terrified because of their very greatness. Their art was the art that convinced. When we saw the pictures, we saw the demons themselves and were afraid of them. And the queer part was that Pickman got none of his power from the use of selectiveness or bizarrerie. Nothing was blurred, distorted, or conventionalized. Outlines were sharp and lifelike, and details were almost painfully defined. And the faces. It was not any mere artist's interpretation that we saw. It was pandemonium itself, crystal clear in stark objectivity. That was it, by heaven! The man was not a fantastite or romancist at all. He did not even try to give us the churning, prismatic ephemera of dreams, but coldly and sardonically reflected some stable, mechanistic, and well-elevated horror beyond which he saw fully, brilliantly, squarely, and unfalteringly. God knows what the world could have been, or where he had glimpsed it. The blasphemous shapes that loped and trotted and crawled through it, but whatever the baffling source of the images, one thing was plain. Pickman was in every sense, in conceptualization and in execution, a thorough, painstaking, and almost scientific realist. My host was now leading the way down to the cellar to his actual studio, and I braced myself for some hellish efforts among the unfinished canvases. As we reached the bottom of the damp stairs, he turned his flashlight to a corner of the large open space at hand, revealing a circular brick curb of what was evidently a great well in the earthen floor. We walked nearer, and I saw that it must be 5 feet across, with walls a good foot thick and some 6 inches above ground level. solid work of the 17th century. Or I was much mistaken. That, Pickman said, was the kind of thing he had been talking about, an aperture of the network of tunnels that used to undermine the hill. I noticed idly that it did not seem to be bricked up, and that a heavy disk of wood formed the apparent cover, thinking of the things that had been mere rhetoric. I shivered slightly, then turned to follow him a step and through a narrow door in a room of fair size, provided with a wooden floor and furnished as a studio. An acetylene gas outfit gave the light necessary for work. The unfinished pictures on easels dropped against the walls were as ghastly as the finished ones upstairs, and showed the painstaking methods of the artist. Scenes were blocked out with extreme care, and penciled guidelines told of the minute exactitude which Pickman used in getting the right perspective and proportions. The man was great. I say it even now, knowing as much as I do. A large camera on a table excited my notice, and Pickman told me he used it in taking scenes for backgrounds, so that he might paint them for photographs in the studio instead of carting his outfit around the town for this or that view. He thought a photograph quite as good as an actual scene or model for sustained work, and declared he employed them regularly. There was something very disturbing about the nauseous sketches of half-finished monstrosities that leered from around every side of the room. When Pickman suddenly unveiled a huge canvas on the sideway from the light, I could not keep, for my life, keeping back a loud scream the second I admitted that night. It echoed and echoed through the dim vaultings of that ancient and nitrous cellar. I had to choke back a flood of reaction that threatened to burst out as hysterical laughter. Merciful Creator, Elliot, but I didn't know how much was real and how much was feverish fancy. It doesn't seem to me that Earth can hold a dream like that. It was a colossal and nameless blasphemy with glaring red eyes, and it held in its bony claws a thing that had been a man, gnawing at the head as a child nibbles from a stick of candy. Its position was a kind of crouch, and as one looked, one felt as any moment it might drop its present prey and seek a juicier morsel. But damn it, it wasn't even the fiendish subject that made such an immortal fountainhead of all panic. Not that, nor the dog face with its pointed ears, bloodshot eyes, flat nose, drooling lips. It wasn't the scaly claws, nor the mold-caked body, nor the half-hooved feet. None of these. Though any one of them might as well have driven an excitable man to madness. It was the technique, Elliot. The impetus, the unnatural technique. As I am a living being, I never elsewhere saw the actual breath of life so fused into a canvas. The monster was there, and it glared and gnawed and glared. And I knew that only a suspension of nature's laws could ever let a man paint a thing like this without a model, without some glimpse of the nether void which no mortal unsold to the fiend had ever had. Pinned with a thumbtack to the vacant part of the canvas was a piece of paper now badly curled up. Probably, I thought, a photograph from which Pickman meant to paint a background, as hideous as the nightmare was to enhance. I reached out to uncurl and look at it, when suddenly I saw Pickman start as if shot. He had been listening with particular intensity ever since my shocked scream had waked unaccustomed echoes in the dark cellar, and now he seemed struck with a fright which, though not comparable to my own, had it in more physical than of the spiritual. He drew a revolver and motioned to me in silence, then stepped out of the main cellar and closed the door behind him. I think I was paralyzed for an instant. Imitating Pickman's listening, I fancied I heard a faint scurrying sound somewhere, and a series of squeals or beats in a direction I could not determine. I thought of huge rats and shuddered. Then there came a subdued sort of clatter, which somehow sent me in goose flesh, a furtive, groping kind of clatter. Though I can't attempt to convey what I meant in words. It was like heavy wood falling on stone or brick. Wood on brick. What did that make me think of? It came again, and louder. It was a vibration as if the wood had fallen further than it had fallen before. After that followed a sharp, grating noise. A shouted gibberish from Pikmin, and the deafening discharge of all 6 chambers of a revolver, fired speculatively, as a lion tamer might fire in the air for effect, a muffled squeal or squawk and a thud, and more wood and brick grating, a pause, and the opening of the door, which I'll confess I started violently. Pikmin reappeared with his smoking weapon, cursing the bloated rats that infested the ancient well. The deuce knows what they eat, Vtuber, he grinned. For those archaic tunnels touch the graveyard and witch den and seacoast, but whatever it is, they must have run short. And for they were devilish anxious to get out. Your yelling stirred them up, I fancy. Better be cautious in these old places. Our rodent friends are the one drawback, though I sometimes think they're a positive asset by way of atmosphere and color. Well, Elliot, that was the end of the night's adventure. Pikmin had promised to show me the place, and heaven knows he had done it. He led me out of that tangle of alleys in another direction. It seems, for when we sighted a lamppost, we were in a half-familiar street with monotonous rows of mingled tenement blocks and old houses. Charter Street it turned out to be, but I was too flustered to notice where we hit it. We were too late for the elevated, and walked back downtown through Hanover Street. I remember that wall. We switched from Trentman up Beacon, and Pikmin left me at the corner of Joy, where I turned off. I never spoke to him again. Why did I drop him? Don't be impatient. Wait till I ring for coffee. We haven't had enough for the other stuff, but I, for one, need something. No, it wasn't the paintings I saw in that place, but I swear they were enough to get him ostracized in 9/10 of the homes and clubs of Boston. But I guess you won't wonder now that I have to steer clear of subways and cellars. It was something I found in my coat the next morning. You know, the curled-up paper tacked to the frightful canvas in the cellar. The thing I thought was a photograph for some scene he had meant to use as a background. For that monster. The last scare had come while I was reaching to uncurl it, and it seems I had vacantly crumpled it into my pocket. But here's the coffee. Take it back, Elliot, if you're wise. Yes, that paper was the reason I dropped Pikmin. Richard Upton Pikmin, the greatest artist I'd ever known, the foulest thing that had ever leaped the bounds of life into the pits of myth and madness. Elliot, old Reed was right. He wasn't strictly human. Either he was born in a strange shadow, or he'd found a way to unlock the forbidden gate. That's all the same for now, for he's gone, back into the fabulous darkness he loved to haunt. Here, let's have the chandelier going. Don't ask me to explain, or even conjecture what I burned. Don't ask me either. What lay beyond the mole-like scrambling Pikmin was so keen to pass off as rats. There are secrets, you know, which might have come from old Salem times, and Cotton Mather tells even stranger things. You know how damned lifelike Pikmin's paintings were? How we all wondered where he got those faces? Well, that paper wasn't a photograph of any background after all. What it showed was simply a monstrous being he was painting on that awful canvas. It was the model he was using, for its background was merely the wall of the cellar studio in minute detail. But by God, Elliot, it was a photograph from life. And that's Pikmin's model. Which is better than I remember. I I used to not like how rambly it was, but let's just put it this way, I'm digging it now. I'm definitely... That's definitely up there with some of my favorite of Lovecraft's works. Let me just... A lot of Lovecraft stories are pretty much a guy telling his friend about some fucked up thing he'd heard about. Yeah, but like, you know? Hold on. Hold on, I need to check something. Hold on. Sorry, I was trying to double check what that one person was trying to say in chat. I'm not gonna lie. While reading Lovecraft stories, someone just writing N makes me a little nervous. So I had to, like... You know that look Doom guy does when you're playing Doom? And he hears a monster? That's what I was doing. I, like, had to look over to be like, please don't follow that up with an eye. Please don't follow that up with an eye. I had to know. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Yeah, I don't know the context. I think he's just a Spanish or Portuguese speaker that just wandered on an HP Lovecraft reading stream, which is weird, but whatever. It's the internet. It's an open. It's an open forum. Although I was, again, a little nervous to just see the letter N in isolation because I've seen what can happen there. Either way. How long is this story? Not very long, but it's a lot of long paragraphs. That explains it. All right. So, second to last story. Is that, if I recall correctly, that is what penultimate means, is it not? Either way. I'm gonna say this right now. There is a name of a character who is common in this story that I do not know how to pronounce. I am gonna try my best. But this one is called The Terrible Old Man, which I have never read. Let me just... It was the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silvia to call upon the terrible old man. The old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea. It is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of messers. Ricci, Zanuck, and Silvia, for that profession was nothing less dignified than robbery. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally kept him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides a fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musty and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of East India clipper ships in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. Among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they may resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away most of the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk who sometimes steal up to the house to peer through the dusty panes. Those folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, in each a small piece of lead suspended pendulum-wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and Maid Ellis. And that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations, as if an answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again, but Angelo Ricci and Joe Zanuck and Manuel Silva were not of Kingsport blood. They were that new and heterogeneous aliens, dark that lies beyond the charmed circles of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helplessly graybeard, who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane, and those whose thin, weak hands shook pitifully. They were really sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow, whom everybody shunned, and whom all the dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about the very old and feeble man who has no account to the bank, and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. Messrs. Ricci, Zanuck, and Sylvia selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Sylvia were to interview the poor old gentleman, whilst Mr. Zanuck waited for them and their presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in the Ship Street. But the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds, desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions, prompted these plans for a quiet and unostentatious departure. As prearranged, the 3 adventurers started out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterwards. Messrs. Ricci and Sylvia met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to worry about than mere idle superstition. They feared that it might be unpleasant work, making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded gold and silver, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Sylvia were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons valuable, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. So they moved up to one of the lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. Then they donned masks and knocked politely to the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Zanuck, as he fidgeted restlessly in the covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in the Ship Street. He was more than ordinary tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams which he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed with the deed. He had not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain. Very nervously, he watched that narrow oaken gate with the high, ivory-clad stone wall. Frequently he consulted his watch, and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing that his treasure was hidden, and thorough a search become necessary? Mr. Zanuck did not like to wait long in the dark in such a place. When he sensed a soft tread or tapping from the walk within the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at the rusty latch, and saw a narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of a single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of the sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man, leaning quietly to his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Zanuck had never noticed the color of the old man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed with many cutlasses, and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels, which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in the ship street, or certainly, specially, inhuman cries, probably of a stray animal or migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this idle village gossip, the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. I don't know what I expected from a story called The Terrible Old Man, but whatever. That was you know how it is. Let me just take a look to see who's here. Oh shit, fucking Snailians and Nyx have joined the party. Yeah, that story's just kind of but not every story. What was this story meant for? Yeah, this was one of his like handful of like magazine stories, and was more used for world building of his fictional like. You've seen worse old men working at Long John Silver's? Hell yeah. Lovecraft had like his own fictional version of New England, and there is technically a story that follows up this one. But, like, I don't know. That one's whatever. I'm gonna take a quick break so that I can get up and get some water. Because, my throat's getting a little scratchy. If they don't get their 5 fish in a timely manner, whoo boy. Oh, I feel. I'ma just... Don't worry about it. I'll be right back. I'm back. Shit's fixed. So I want to preface this with, this last story ain't a banger, but it's memorable. So, bit of background. A lot, and I mean a lot of, a lot of his stories are like, I am afraid of things I don't understand, people I don't understand, cultures I don't understand, literally anyone that isn't a very specific kind of white. Like, Lovecraft was a very xenophobic man. I'm gonna say xenophobic specifically because he hated a lot. And I think it went beyond race. But one of his fears was not one of these. And for that, I am going to read a story that also showed off he had a horrific fear, a paralyzing fear, of air conditioners. Yes, you heard that right. Air conditioners. Which, when was the air conditioner invented? 1902. The story was written in March of 1926. That is 24 years to get used to air being colder on the inside. Like, Howie, my man, please. Now, I do want to make the case. The 1920s were a time where a lot of people, I think he lived up until like, when did he pass? You remember the story from a Batman story? Yeah. H.P. Lovecraft, when did he die? 1937. So, by the time that he was an adult and, like, thrust out of his house, which you'll actually notice that there is a direct correlation with him being thrust out of his, like, family home, and and him writing more stories about being terrified of things he does not understand. I believe he was also afraid of people that were just too damn eccentric. I have no proof of this, except for the stories I read. I think it is hilarious that one of the pioneers of the horror industry, well, I guess industry is maybe the wrong word for it, one of the pioneers of horror as, like, a genre, as a subculture of interest, shit like that he was so piss terrified of literally everything. Now, he did also become a lot calmer as he lived. Like, up until his death. Like, I think he hated Jewish people for a time, but then, like, ended up marrying a Jewish woman. So that sort of thing. Like, he did change a lot of his views over time. It's just kind of unfortunate that it took so long, and that, let's just say that he passed before he really was able to be, like, normal for the era? I don't know how else to put it. Although I wonder, there has got to be a timeline where H.P. Lovecraft lived through World War II. I'm genuinely curious what sort of things he would have written. Doom that came to Gotham, Mr. Freeze was used as a stand. Yep. His correspondence with Robert E. Howard, I think, showed that he was growing as a person. Yeah. Now, this is not me excusing that he was legitimately racist. He was legitimately a terrible man for a very long time. But, like, he was growing. But Howard, My man. My main man. Howard Philip Lovecraft. Air conditioners? You don't trust air conditioners? Even for the era he lived in, he was bad? Yeah, that was something that when I was very young, and I was talking about like, hey, why are these H.P. Lovecraft stories that I've been reading, why are they so weird? And it's like, and my dad was like, he was weird even for the time. Which, as I've grown older, has become, he was racist even for the time. A Klansman would probably look at him and go, Howard, calm down. That sort of thing. That level of it being kind of bad. It's interesting. It's because, like, a lot of it also comes from absolutely, how do I put it? He was, like, sheltered until his, like, early 20s. And then kicked out of that sheltered living arrangement. So, do you ever think he would have turned into Alex Jones do you think he would have ever been into Alex Jones if he were alive today? I don't know. I think if we want to take things linearly, no. I genuinely think if we want to take things in like if he was getting better about like a lot of his superstitions and about a lot of his xenophobia, I don't think if he were alive to this day, which he would be fucking old if he were, like, the man was born in 1890. Keep this in mind. Fucking, it's so weird to just like think of what his life was like. The man was a fucking weirdo. But he also gave us a lot of good stories and a lot of like good jumping off points and a very interesting mythos that is unfortunately grounded in some things of the time. I don't know. I thought that sort of thing would eventually come up anyways. Either way, let's start cold air. Or cool air. I'm sorry. Cool air. You have to explain to me why I am afraid of a draught of cool air, why I shiver more when others upon entering a cold room, and seem nauseated and repelled when the chill of evening creeps through the heat of an autumn day. There are those who I say respond to cold as others do to a bad odor. And I am the least to deny the impression. What I will do is to relay the most horrible circumstance I've ever encountered and leave it to you to judge whether or not this forms a suitable explanation to my peculiarity. It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, and solitude. I've found it in the glare of mid-afternoon, in the clangor of a metropolis, in the teeming midst of a shabby and commonplace rooming house with a prosaic landlady and two stalwart men by my side. In the spring of 1923, I had secured some dreary and unprofitable magazine work in the city of New York, and being unable to pay any substantial rent, began drifting from one cheap boarding establishment to another in search of a room which might combine the qualities of decent cleanliness, endurable furnishings, and very reasonable price. It soon developed that I had only a choice between different evils, but after a time, I came upon a house in West 14th Street, which disgusted me much less than the others I had sampled. The place was a 4-story mansion of brownstone, dating apparently from the late 40s, and fitted with woodwork and marble whose stained and sullied splendor argued a descent from high levels of tasteful opulence. In the rooms, large and lofty, and decorated with impossible paper and ridiculously ornate stucco cornices, which lingered a depressing mustiness and a hint of obscure cookery. But but the floors were clean, and linen tolerably regular, and the hot water not too often cold or turned off, so that I came to regard it in at least a bearable place to hibernate till one might really live again. The landlady, a slanternly, almost bearded Spanish woman named Herrero, did not annoy me with gossip or with criticisms of late burning electric light on my third-floor hall room, and my fellow lodgers were as quiet and uncommunicative as one might desire. Being mostly Spaniards, a little above the coarsest and crotchest grade, only the din of streetcars in the thoroughfare below proved a serious annoyance. I had been here about 3 weeks when the first incident occurred. One evening at the 8th, I heard a spattering on the floor and became suddenly aware that I had been smelling the pungent odor of ammonia for some time. Looking about, I saw that the ceiling was wet and dripping, the soaking apparently proceeding from a corner on the side of the street. Anxious to stop the matter at its source, I hastened to the basement to tell the landlady and was assured by her that the trouble would quickly be set right. "Doctor Munoz," she cried as she rushed upstairs ahead of me. We have spilled. Oh, okay. He have spilled his chemicals. He is too sick to doctor himself. Sicker and sicker all the time, but he will not have the author for help. But he will not have no author for help. He is very queer in his sickness, and all day he take funny-smelling baths, and he cannot get excited or warm. All his own homework he do. His little room are full of bottles and machines. He do not work as doctor, but he was great once. My father in Barcelona have heard of him, and only just now he fix an arm of the plumber that get hurt of sudden. He never go out, only on roof, and my boy Esteban was bringing him. He bring him his food and laundry and medicines and chemicals. My God, the Salamonic and man he used for keep him cool. I forgot about the heavy Spanish accent in this. Whoops. Ms. Herrero disappeared on the staircase to the 4th floor, and I returned to my room. The ammonia ceased to drip, and I cleaned up from what had spilled and opened in the window for air. I heard the landlady's heavy footsteps above me. Dr. Munoz I had never heard, save for certain sounds such as gasoline-driven mechanism. Since his step was soft and gentle, I wondered for a moment what the strange affliction for this man might be, whether his obstinate refusal of outside aid were not a result of rather baseless eccentricity. There is, I reflect tritely, an infinite deal of pathos in the state of an eminent person who has come down in the world. I might never have known Dr. Munoz had it not been for the heart attack that suddenly seized me one forenoon as I was sat writing in my room. Physicians told me of the danger of these spells, and I knew there was no time to be lost, so remembering that the landlady had said about that the invalids help with the injured workmen, I dragged myself upstairs and knocked feebly at the door above mine. My knock was answered in good English by a curious voice, some distance above the right, asking my name and business. And these things being stated, there came an opening of the door next to the one I had sought. A rush of cool air greeted me, and though the day of one of the hottest of late June, I shivered as I crossed the threshold into a large apartment whose rich and tasteful decoration surprised me in the nest of squalor and seediness. A folding couch now filled its diurnal role of sofa, and the mahogany furniture, sumptuous hangings, old paintings, and mellow bookshelf all bespoke a gentleman's study rather than a boarding-house bedroom. I now saw this hall room above mine, the little room of bottles and machines, which Ms. Herrero had mentioned was merely a laboratory for the doctor. And his main living quarters lay in the spacious adjoining room, whose convenient alcoves and very large, contiguous bathroom permitted him to hide all dressers and obtrusively utilitarian devices. Dr. Munoz, most certainly, was a man of birth, cultivation, and discrimination. The figure before me was short, but exquisitely proportioned, and clad in somewhat formal dress of perfect cut and fit. A hybrid face of masterful, though not arrogant expression, had adorned but a short iron gray, full beard. And an old-fashioned pince-nez shielded the full, dark eyes, surmounted an aquiline nose, which gave me a Moorish touch of the physiognomy, otherwise dominantly Celtiberian? Thick, well-trimmed hair that argued the punctual calls of a barber, that was particularly graceful above a high forehead, and the whole picture was one of striking intelligence and superior blood and breeding. Again, much different time. Nevertheless, as I saw Dr. Munoz in that blast of cool air, I felt a repugnance which nothing in his aspect could justify. Only his lividly inclined complexion of coldness of touch could have afforded a physical basis for this feeling, and even these could have been excusable considering the man's known individualism. I might, too, have been the singular cold that alienated me. For such chillness was abnormal on so hot a day, and the abnormal ways, too, always excites aversion, distrust, and fear. But repugnance was soon forgotten in admiration, for the strange physician's extreme skill at once became manifest despite the cold iceness and shakiness of his bloodless-looking hands. He clearly understood my needs at a glance, and misinterpreted to them with a master's deftness. He clearly understood my needs at a glance and administered them with a master's deftness, the while reassuring me, in a firmly modulated, though oddly hollow and timbreless voice, that he was the bitterest of sworn enemies to death, and had sunk his fortune and all his friends in a lifetime of bizarre experiment devoted to its bafflement and extirpation. Apologies. Something of the benevolent fanatic seemed to reside with him, and he rambled for almost garrulously. Huh. I've never heard that word before. He was even flowery for the time. Garrulously, as he sounded my chest and mixed a suitable draught of drugs fetched from a smaller laboratory room. Evidently he found the society of a well-born man a rare novelty in the dingy environment, and was moved in unaccustomed speech of memories of days better surged over him. His voice, if queer, was at least soothing, and I could not even perceive that he breathed as the fluent sentences rolled urbanely out. He sought to distract my mind from my own seizure by speaking his theories and experiments, and I remember his tactfully consoling me about my weak heart, but insisting that will and consciousness are stronger than organic life itself, so that if a bodily frame be but originally healthy and carefully preserved, it may, though a scientific enhancement of those qualities, retain a kind of nervous animation despite the most serious impairments, defects, and even absences of the battery of specific organs. He half jestingly said, some day teach me to live, or at least to possess some kind of conscious existence, without any heart at all. For his part, he was afflicted with a complication of malades, requiring a very exact regimen which included constant cold. Any marked rise in temperature might, if prolonged, affect him fatally. And the frigidity of the habitation, some 55 or 56 degrees Fahrenheit, was maintained by an absorption system of ammonia cooling, the gasoline engine for whose pumps I had heard in my own room below. Relieved of my seizure in a marvelously short while, I left the chivalry place, a discipline and devotee of the gifted recluse. After I had paid him frequent overcoated calls, listening while he told of secret researches and almost ghastly results, and trembling a bit when I examined the unconventional and astonishingly ancient volumes on the shelves, I was eventually, I may add, almost cured of my disease for all time by his skillful administrations, which seems that he did not scorn the incantations of the medievalists. While he believed the cryptic formulae to contain rare psychological stimuli, which might conceivably have singular effects on the substance of a nefarious system from which organic pulsations had fled. I was touched by his account of the aged Dr. Torres of Valencia, who had shared his earlier experiments and nursed him through the great illness of 18 years before, where his present disorders proceeded. No sooner had the venerable practitioner saved his colleague than he himself succumbed to the grim enemy he had fought. Perhaps the strain had been too great, for Dr. Munoz had made it whisperingly clear, though not in detail, that the methods of healing had almost extraordinarily involving scenes and processes not welcomed by elderly or conservative gallons. 2 seconds. As the weeks passed, I observed with regret that my new friend had indeed slowly but unmistakably losing ground physically, as Ms. Herrera had suggested. The livid aspect of his countenance was intensified. His voice became more hollow and indistinct. His muscular motions were less perfectly coordinated, and his mind and will displayed less resilience and initiative. Of this sad change he seemed by no means unaware, and little by little his expression and conversation took both a gruesome irony which restored to me something of more subtle repulsion than I originally felt. He developed strange carapaces, acquiring a fondness for exotic spices and Egyptian incense, till his room smelled like a vault of sepulchred pharaoh in the Valley of Kings. At the time his demands of cold air increased, and with my aid he amplified the ammonia piping of his room and modified the pumps and great refrigerating machines till he could keep the temperature as low as 34 degrees or 40 degrees. And finally, even 28 degrees. The bathroom and laboratory, of course, being less chilled in order that water might not freeze, that the chemical processes might not be impeded. The tenant adjoining him complained of the icy air from around the connecting door, so I helped him fit heavy hangings to obviate the difficulty. A kind of growing horror, the outer and morbid cast, seemed to possess him. He talked of death incessantly, and laughed hollowly when such things as burial and funeral arrangements were gently suggested. All in all, he became a disconcerting and even gruesome companion, yet in my gratitude for his healing, I could not well abandon him to the strangers around him, and was careful to dust his room and attend his needs each day, muffled in a heavy ulster, which I brought especially for the purpose. I likewise did much of his shopping, gasped in the bafflement of some of the chemicals he ordered from the druggists and laboratory supply houses. And in increasing and unexpected atmosphere, a panic seemed to rise around his apartment. The whole house, as I had said, had a musty odor, and the smell in his room was worse. And in spite of all the spices and incense and the pungent chemicals of now incessant baths which he insisted on taking unaided, I perceived that it might be connected to his ailment, and shuddered when I reflected on what his ailment might be. Miss Herrera crossed herself when she looked at him, and gave him unreservedly to me, not even letting her son Esteban continue to run errands for him. When I suggested other physicians, the sufferer would fly into as much of a rage as he seemed to dare entertain. He eventually feared the physical effect of violent emotion, yet his will and driving force waxed rather than waned, and he refused to be confined to his bed. The lassitude of his earlier ill days gave him a place to return to his fiery purpose, so that he seemed to hurl defiance at the death daemon, even as the ancient enemy seized him. The pretense of eating, almost curiously like a formality with him, he virtually abandoned, and mental power alone appeared to keep him from total collapse. He acquired a habit of writing long documents of some sort, which he carefully sealed and filled with injunctions with injunctions that I transmit them after his death to certain persons whom he named. For the most part, lettered East Indians, but including a once celebrated French physician that generally thought dead, and about whom the inconceivable things had been whispered. As it happened, I burned all the papers undelivered and unopened. His aspect and voice became utterly frightful, and his presence almost unbearable. One September day, an unexpected glimpse of him induced an epileptic fit in a One September day, an unexpected glimpse of him induced an epileptic fit in a man who had come to repair his electric desk lamp. A fit which he had prescribed effectively whilst keeping himself out of sight. That man, oddly enough, had been through the terrors of the Great War without having incurred any frights so thorough. Then, in the middle of October, the horror of horrors came with stupefying suddenness. One night, about 11, the pump of the refrigerating machine broke down, so that within 3 hours, the processing ammonia cooling became impossible. Dr. Minot summoned me, thumping to the door, and I worked desperately to repair the injury while my host cursed in a tone whose lifeless, rattling hollowness surpassed description. My amateur effects, however, proved of no usage, and when I brought in a mechanic from a neighboring all-night garage, we learned that nothing could be done till morning, when a new piston could have been attained. The moribund's hermit rage and fear, swelling to grotesque proportions, seemed likely to shatter the remains of his failing physique, and once a spasm caused to clap his hands to his eyes and rush into the bathroom. He groped his way out with a face tightly bandaged. I never saw his eyes again. The frigidity of the apartment was now sensibly diminishing. At about 5 a.m., the doctor retired to his bathroom, commending me to keep him supplied with all the ice I could obtain at all-night drugstores and cafeterias. As I would return from my sometimes discouraging trips and lay my spoils before the closed bathroom door, I could hear a restless splashing within, a thick voice croaking out the order for more, more. At length, the warm day broke, and shops opened one by one. I asked Esbon either to help with ice fetching while I obtained the pump piston, or to order the piston while I continued with the ice, but instructed by his mother, he absolutely refused. Finally, I hired a seedy-looking loafer whom I encountered on the corner of 8th Avenue to keep a patient supplied with ice from a little shop where I introduced him, and applied myself more diligently to the task of finding a pump piston and encouraging workmen competent enough to install it. The task seemed interminable. I raged almost as violently as the hermit when I saw the hours slipping in a breathless, bloodless round of vain telephoning and a hectic quest from place to place, hither and thither, by subway and surface car. About noon, I encountered a suitable supply house far downtown. At approximately 1:30 p.m., arrived at my boarding place, which the necessary paraphernalia and 2 sturdy, intelligent machines. I'd done all I could, and I hoped I was in time. Black terror, however, preceded me. The house was in utter turmoil, and above the chatter of awed voices, I heard a man praying in deep basso. Fiendish things were in the air, and lodgers told over the beads of their rosaries as they caught the odor from beneath the doctor's closed door. The lounger I hired, it seems, had fled screaming and mad-eyed not long after his secondary delivery of ice, perhaps as a result of excessive curiosity. He could not, of course, have locked the door behind him, yet it was now fastened, presumably from the inside. There was no sound within, save for a nameless sort of slow, thick dripping. Briefly consulting with Ms. Herrero and the workmen, despite a fear that gnawed my inmost soul, I advised the breaking down of the door, but the landlady found a turnkey from the outside with some wire device. We had previously opened the doors of all the other rooms of that hall, flung all the windows to the very top, now noses protected by handkerchiefs, we tremblingly invaded the accursed room south, which blazed with the warm sun of the early afternoon. A kind of dark, slimy trail led from the open bathroom. A kind of dark, slimy trail led from bathroom door to hall door, and thence to the desk, where a terrible little pool had accumulated. Something had scrawled there in pencil in an awful blind hand on a piece of paper hideously smeared, as though by the very claws that traced by the hurried last words, when the trail led to the couch and ended unutterably. That was, or had been, on the couch I could not dare what was, or had been, on the couch I dare not say here, but this is what I shrivelingly puzzled out from the sickly smeared paper before I drew a match and burned it to a crisp. That I puzzled out the terror as the landlady and two mechanics rushed frantically from the hellish place to babble their incoherent stories at the nearest police station. The nauseous words seemed well nigh incredible in that yellow sunlight. The clatter of cars and motor trucks ascending clamorously from crowded 14th Street. Yet I confess that I believed them then. Whether I believe them now, I honestly do not know. There were things for which it is better not to speculate. And all I could say is that I hate the smell of ammonia, and the faint, and grow faint at the draught of unusually cool air. The end, ran that noisome scrawl, is here. No more ice. The man looked and ran away. Warmer every minute to the tissue, and the tissues can't last. I fancy you know what I said about the will and nerves of the preserved body after the organs ceased to work. It was a good theory, but couldn't keep up indefinitely. There was a gradual deterioration I had not foreseen. Dr. Torres knew, but the shock killed him. He couldn't stand what he had to do. He had to get me in a strange, dark place when he minded my letter and nursed me back, and the organs never would work again. It had to be done my way. Preservation. For you see, I died that time 18 years ago. And that was Cool Air, a story that I will say, with genuine authority, as a horror connoisseur, is not very good. But it is funny to me that H.P. Lovecraft, of all people, was fucking terrified of air conditioning. And that's all the stories I have for the night. I'm, of course, like, absolutely willing to hear, like, what people thought of this. It was a genuine, like, I'm legit kind of curious, if you feel me. Brain shut down for a second. Either way, I don't offhand. Nice little stream. You enjoyed yourself. That's the mood I wanted, give or take. It's a little late for there to be a raid because fucking no one's streaming at 4:42 a.m. At least not in the English speaking market that I know of. I don't know. I enjoyed myself a lot. It's something I can do. How did you guys feel about the, like, actual video end of things? Because, like, deadass, I'm a little curious. I'm seeing on the Twitch screen, I could have made things a little bit more obvious. Like, let me fix this now, while we're here, to just, like, show you how easy this was for me to set up. Like, look at that. Look at that. That's a lot more obvious. I meant for that to be the effect. And it was on my OBS monitor, but not on the stream, it seems. Which I will apologize for. because I know that Silent Hill 4 has a noise filter over it. Spooky. Yes. It also turns out I could put a noise filter over myself in VC Face, which was an interesting little factoid, little bit of information that I was not aware of. I don't know. I don't know what's up. I genuinely had a good night, though. If you stuck around for all that and enjoyed it, I know that, this stream was kind of like a niche idea, if that makes sense. Like, I'm aware of the limited appeal of, fucking, like, reading streams, but, like, I was thinking, like, hey, maybe I could do some reading, maybe I could help lull some people to sleep. And I don't know, I think I did that, actually. I think I actually properly made that work. I don't know if I'm gonna do another Lovecraft reading stream, but, like, there's a lot of good shit in the public domain nowadays. That's all I'm gonna say. 'Cause, let me put it this way, now that's the 2020s, Mama Bedtime. Yeah, exactly. It just so happens that it's like, hey, you know how I help you sleep? By scaring the shit out of you. Which, I mean, that's not what actually happened. I doubt anyone got actually, like, spooked. But like, I had fun. I had a lot of fun. I'm also shocked at how, like, good the... Like, I slapped together this scene in OBS in, like, 15 minutes. Like, I had to go in VR chat, take a screenshot of room 302, that was, like, half decent in, like, a place that I could use. Then it's like, okay, well, I have to make a noise filter for the game, because Silent Hill 4 has a noise filter. And I can just put one over myself in VC Face. I could also, like, add my own, what's it called? I could add, like, dynamic shadows and, like, a high quality model. And, like, since I'm not actually, like, playing a game, I can have the model as high as I want, which is, like, legitimately cool. It's like, hey, you can see me in all my glory, which is really cool. Speaking of which, hey, hold on. Y'all want to see some shit? Like, look at me. Look at me in all my glory. Look at my fucking shoes. Like, look at that shit. Look at that shit. Ain't that cool? Ain't that the coolest shit ever? I think it's the coolest shit ever, but that's just me. It is so cool. I don't get to do this often. I genuinely just don't get to do what I want often. And, like, having the ability to just be like, hey, I want to read fucking stories that are, like, either in the public domain or, like, the author or rights holder doesn't care. Also, hey, Nix, I'm actually glad you came by, because, like, you don't usually do horror. So, like, I'm happy to see that you came by, despite not always being your jam. It's legitimately nice to see. Granted, I assume you do better with the written word than seeing things. God, this fucking model is so cool. I can't wait till I get, like, Elite Motion, and then I can actually have, like, hand motions. Either way, that's all I have for the night. Mostly show up late, but yeah, didn't pay attention, but yeah. Yes, but were you listening to me and drifting? That's what I want. I want you to be sleepy. I want you to sleep. I want you to rest well. If you would like to support the channel more directly, there are links below wherever you're watching this to things like the Streamlabs donation link and the community Discord server. If you are on Twitch, there are also bits and subscriptions. I don't know why I'm doing this voice, but I like it. I do not currently have any plans for tomorrow, but we will see what happens. I will have to figure that out. I'm glad I have expressions again. In this scene, at least. ASMR voice? Nah. I don't want to do ASMR that much. Not unless I can get, like, what DankPods calls the freakish ears on a stand. I want those. So that I can, like, lick your ear or some shit. I want to be, like, I want to do some creepy shit. With ASMR. Like, dude. Either way. Another thing, because, well, let me actually put myself up. Because I set down the rule very early to not be doing any voice redeems while I am reading, and you all did so graciously, so well. I'm happy with all of you. I'm proud of all of you. So you get to have one for free as a treat. Ara ara. Have a good rest of your night. Thank you.